Undertale Yellow, probably the most anticipated Undertale fan game since the original indie game's creation. This project, in the works for 7 years, was finally released towards the end of last year, and its trailer garnered a whopping 1 million views. Impressive considering how long it's been since the height of the Undertale fandom. Undertale Yellow was met with overall positive feedback alongside some areas to improve on, and honestly, I tend to agree with most of the players' opinions, positive or negative. It was a fun game, with some flaws that, if ironed out, would have let this passion project reach its full potential. Mind you, I'd recommend taking this video with a pinch of salt, as my opinion changes very often, and I'm 99% sure my opinion on Undertale Yellow will change within the next year or so too. And if you do disagree, or agree, please say so in the comments. We might even have a discussion. Anyway, let's begin. Let's start off with the most overlooked aspect of the original game, Undertale, which is its atmosphere. The atmosphere of an area or moment in a game is important to me, as it's what engulfs me into the game's environment. This can be achieved through various means which add up, such as music, visual and sound effects, and colours. For example, Hotland and its hot orange colours, and other medium synths alongside the massive metallic core in the background evokes the feeling of being in an industrial hellscape. But what about Snowdin's cozy festive feeling on the other side of the spectrum? These helped me to sort of jump into the game's world, making every important or sad moment that much more impactful, even with Undertale's minimal graphics and copy-pasted trees. So how does Undertale Yellow fare in this respect? Very well actually. The wind howling in the dunes and its exciting music gets the blood pumping as you enter the first new environment Yellow has to offer. Steamworks, while it does make my eyes hurt, incorporates synthetic strings and radioactive looking pink liquid into the region, giving off a similar industrial hellscape vibe to Hotland. To be fair, what helped was the improved graphics, animations and music, such as the cherry blossoms in the background of Soroba's fight, which probably wouldn't have been there if it was the original game. No matter how well the characters' boss fights hold up in hindsight, I thoroughly enjoyed playing them in the moment. Can I just add, the attention to detail in this game is phenomenal. There are a multitude of examples, like Clover kicking their legs like a bored child, the callbacks to other fights, and even Roots. I might have mistaken you for a Sentinel of Silence.
Sentinel of Silence.
How about we settle this fairly? Hey, duel. It's time for us to duel. You mean duel? Dal's room flashing when lightning strikes, it just highlights the love put into the game. In fairness to Undertale, it was a one-man team, and the game was made in less time, so I'm not faulting the original game for not having such detail. Soroba, probably the game's biggest criticism. Ultimately, I didn't think she was nearly as bad as people said she was, but she's certainly nowhere near perfect. In the pacifist route, you meet her in the Wild East, and she appears to just be a random friend of Starlo. Then she goes on about Kaneko, and starts following you, and doesn't stop. Suddenly she takes over the entire story and becomes the final boss. Some people weren't pleased with this, but I didn't mind, to be honest. The game needed an accelerating final boss, Flowey and Martlet were taken, and Asgore was going to kill you anyway, so he wouldn't be too exciting. That pretty much left Soroba. I do agree that she took a lot of screen time away from Delve though. The poor lad was fully ignored until the very end. He felt like an afterthought of the creators. I think the main issue with Soroba was the creators' passion behind her. They had established this great idea for a tragic story of desperation and stuff, and came to love Soroba and the Katsukanes as a result. Unfortunately, the writers cared about Soroba so much that they forgot to convince the players to care about her either. Even I was finding myself wondering what was going to happen to Clover during Soroba's most crucial moments. What I mean is, we don't really know her regular personality, other than being unimpressed by Starlo's antics. Not to mention the reasons for the mask being so powerful and experimenting on her own daughter weren't explained well enough. Still though, a fun final boss, made thrilling by the aforementioned atmosphere. If it weren't for the suspenseful music in the third phase, the backgrounds, and that scream, the fight wouldn't have been nearly as captivating. I will say though, did she really need 4 phases? What is this, Disbelief Papyrus? In general, Soroba was a good enough character because of her boss fight and backstory, but her backstory wasn't fleshed out enough to justify her stealing the spotlight for so long. Another potential reason Soroba wasn't too well received was because people were jaded by her fight's difficulty. In fact, people had a lot to say about the gameplay in general.
Yes, mate, let's go!
The gameplay to me varies greatly depending on the route. Pacifist's gameplay was incredibly fun. The route has several different soul modes like the lasso and lid. The difficulty had a steady rise, although Soroba did have a bit of a spike. but in my opinion it wasn't drastic. The fight just needed patience, and one less phase to be fair. There's no denying that it does depend on the player's skill level, but even then, there's nothing wrong with a challenging boss. Genocide had a stupid level of difficulty. I get it's supposed to be difficult in order to convince the player to quit the genocide route. But the player isn't directly tied to Clover like they are to Frisk, so it makes no sense from that perspective. I personally had no issue with Saroba, as the attacks were dodgeable and looped, but Axis and Martlet were really taking the mick. I never ended up figuring out Axis's attack patterns like those annoying bombs, but at least his fight was relatively short. Martlet is the real issue. Her attacks were just a bunch of random stuff thrown at you, and doesn't give you a chance to figure out what the hell is going on, even if there's a small pool of attacks. How on earth do you dodge those claws, man? They should have at least given you the chance to learn how to deal with certain moves before getting into the difficult stuff. For example, have the first attack be a few claws, then the next one is only these feathers, and so on. Saroba's pacifist attacks were complex, but when you realized it was multiple attacks stacked on top of each other, it was easier to tell what was going on. Martlet was pure carnage, no strategy or memorization to it. My experience of the genocide route was made worse by the lack of indication of how many robots were left to kill in the Steamworks. The game locks you out of the route before the Axis fight as well. These two things forced me to restart, twice. I was pretty miffed at this, possibly adding to my disdain for the boss fights.
No. Oh no, I have to do it all again. What have I done?
Then the neutral route. I made the mistake of doing the No Mercy route, where I kill everyone on my path, but not so many monsters that I start the genocide route. As a result, I leveled up a lot. This, combined with tough armor, made me pretty much impenetrable. Starla was only doing a couple damage, as was Axis. Before the final boss, I only died by drinking the acid.
No, but I'm drinking it. I died! That's the only time I've died! Welcome back. Oh no, I wasted all that time!
It made for a relatively dull playthrough, one that I think could have been counteracted better by the developers. I don't remember if Undertale had this same flaw too. If I recall correctly, it didn't. The saving grace of the route was Flowey's fight. Creepy, chaotic carnage. A fight that was challenging but not to the point it was annoying. One that told a story through detailed attacks and cutscenes. It was a chance for the team to show off their artistic creativity through medium changes reminiscent of the amazing world of Gumball. Fantastic finale to an otherwise disappointing route. In fairness, I think I'd have unlocked more content if I hadn't gone and killed everyone, so that's on me for picking the No Mercy variation of the neutral route. To add on to my opinions on the individual routes, I also liked how each one had something different to offer. The pacifist route is a proper grandiose ending and all, but the flawed pacifist was interesting because it opened up the idea of moral ambiguity, and you get to see in the moment how different characters react to your actions. In this case, Starlo and Martlet having a falling out over Clover killing Saroba, and their justifications for feeling the ways they do. The neutral route, specifically No Mercy, felt almost lonely, especially in the Steamworks. It was a needed change of pace, seeing Flowey's opinions on Axis without Saroba getting in the way of anything. I'd like to add, it was impressive how seamlessly Flowey's character and backstory fits with the original game, unless I've overlooked any plot holes, of course.
Flowey, it was because the elevator was full. It was in use. I couldn't do anything.
The genocide route was especially thought-provoking. Instead of boredom and curiosity being the fuel for killing everyone, it was Clover's warped perception of justice. This promoted discussion amongst fans about how justified Clover was in doing what they did. I mean, of course, genocide is bad, but it still gave a bit more insight into the mind of Clover. I'm not downplaying Undertale by any means, of course. It was just cool to see Yellow bring something else to the table and avoid being a retelling of Undertale's story with different characters. Thanks to the damage to the overworld and Clover actually gaining a personality of their own, the genocide route was also insanely unsettling. Even I felt threatened by Clover at times. It made for an intriguing route. Something I liked about all three routes was Martlet's development into not following the Royal Guard rulebook, and in different ways as well. In Pacifist, she breaks the rules in favour of Clover, and in Genocide, she breaks the rules against Clover. It is said that a good character is one that is recognizable from its silhouette, and more importantly one that evokes a feeling in the player upon meeting them. Take the Skeleton Brothers. Sans is short, with his hands in his pockets, with a cheeky grin giving the player an impression of a laid-back, goofy guy. Conversely, Papyrus. He stands tall and elegantly, chest puffed out and wearing uniform, One might think he's serious about his work and has a bit of an ego, although his massive smile could hint at someone who's not to be taken seriously. They don't look the prettiest by any means, but their imperfections are what make them more memorable and endearing. It also makes their out of character moments more unnerving. On the other hand, the Undertale Yellow characters are pretty to look at, but aren't exactly memorable to me. In the ending here, they all stand tall like Dubai's skyline, with the only key difference being Dalv's height. Let's pick on Dalv actually, sorry buddy. For someone who has isolated himself, he seems to be quite kempt. I'd say giving him a slightly hunched back could indicate that he timidly hides away from others, for example. Again, because of their passion, it seemed like the creators wanted to make the characters look as perfect as possible, so they went for the Furry OC approach, with some obvious culprits. This could put the characters in jeopardy of becoming notorious Rule 34 characters, but I don't think that's likely. Humor is a tough aspect to talk about. It feels like you're on a tightrope trying not to fall into the pit of bias. In my opinion, however, I thought it was handled well enough. There were some moments and characters I found funny.
The alphabet must have 25 letters now because I'm fresh out of tea. Oh!
And others I didn't.
Did you also know that humans are fireproof? When they're feeling accomplished, they ride monsters straight into a huge fiery sphere. Huh?
However, the unfunny parts weren't ever lasting enough to get on my nerves, unlike a certain queen. The only points of contention would be Axis and the Feisty Four. To me, Axis was hilarious, but to someone who didn't find him so funny, I'd imagine he would have been rather irritating. Everything he said was a joke, even up to the end of his genocide boss fight. And while I found all of that amusing, if someone didn't vibe with his humor, the Steamworks would have gotten old quickly. On the other hand, the Feisty Four, and sometimes Starlo, weren't my cup of tea, but unfortunately they took up the entirety of the Wild East, making for a slightly dull region, one that I completely steamrolled through in the neutral route. The creators could have perhaps shortened the Wild East, I don't know. Like I said though, they weren't persistent enough to make the region annoying, just boring, which is fine because the other areas made up for it, and fans seemed to enjoy the gang anyway.
Hello. Sorry, it seems I have a summer home in La La Land. These don't get lost my way. You're human, right? Hat just like if Prophet he was here. Are you ready for some Royal Guard protocol?
I'm not entirely confident about my opinion in this section. My memory is hazy when it comes to the dialogue, so if you think I'm talking nonsense, please tell me. The dialogue is full of fun little Easter eggs, such as the foreshadowing to Martlet stealing the determination serum from the boat ride, but I believe there is too much dialogue. Everything a character says must have an extra 2 sentences added onto it. I understand this with Martlet, since she is supposed to be a chatterbox, although I think the creators could have cut out half of the waterfall sequence by making Clover fall asleep while she's blabbering on about her questionnaire. It's a creative way to show how much she waffles without actually having her bore the players too. As smart as said Easter eggs and puns were, it was as if the creators wanted to cram every single possible joke and reference into the game. Just because they can, they have to, if you may. Although I mainly noticed this when editing my gameplay videos, so it might have actually been my rubbish voice acting that annoyed me, as opposed to the endless dialogue. I would imagine reading it in silence is more enjoyable. To summarize, the dialogue was smart, but too drawn out. It may seem like I was a bit negative this video, but I cannot stress enough that the criticisms in this video are what make a good game a great one, not a bad game a good one. I still had a blast playing because of most of the humor, the atmosphere, a variety of game modes, many minigames, the story and the visuals, though a few characters, dialogue, genocide bosses and character designs could have been ironed out. Thanks for putting up with my amateur reviewing and narration skills, and like I said, if you agree or disagree with anything, please comment below.